Hoodoo, the Akan term undu, meaning medicine from roots, trees, plant life. Undu, to become heavy with the spirit through spirit possession, spirit communication, divination. Cast, the Akan term guasi, to project, to throw, release. Cast, to form into a mold, to solidify. Hoodoo cast, to project our sacred mold of Akan ancestral religion in North America, the solidification of our identity, our ritual culture of medicine for healing and defense, our ritual culture of spirit communication for knowledge and application. Hoodoo cast, for the preservation of our people and the eradication of our enemies.
Chiamo Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit, meaning Africans, Black people. We are back with Hoodoo Cast podcast for authentic Hoodoo, Akan ancestral religion in North America. I am Odwirafo, Kwesi, Rana Himpata Akan, Odwirafo of Akwamuman and Maruka, Itifi Mu, the Akwamu Nation in North America, within Ojiraman, the Purified Nation, Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people in the Western Hemisphere. So, we're back with our fourth episode. We are back in Washington, D.C., and what we want to cover today is an important topic, things that are affecting millions of our people. We're dealing with primarily the Hoodoo Religious as well as Ancestral Religious Exemption from vaccinations. Now, we published a document, an signed document, and we about over a year ago, when everybody was going through this process of the whole COVID piece and people needing exemptions, religious exemptions from having to take the COVID vaccine in order to go to work, children going to school and so forth. Some people dealing with the fake religions like Christianity and Islam and Judaism and Hinduism and so forth. Some of our people engage in those pseudo-religions with the pseudo-fictional characters, Jesus and Muhammad and Abraham and Isaac and Ishmael and Allah and Yahweh and so forth. Some of their so-called religious leaders were telling them, their fictional deity said, go ahead and get the vaccine. Of course, we understand in Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit culture, African Black culture, ancestral practices and so forth, we know what our enemies are doing. This is nothing more than genocidal warfare. So when they're offering things like Krispy Kreme donuts, a free year's worth of groceries if Black people line up to get these vaccines, 5-6 years from now when everybody's coming down with various forms of degenerative diseases, various forms of cancers and so forth, people will understand what we were talking about. So we put together an ancestral religious exemption with regard to these vaccines. The COVID vaccine as well as vaccines in general. Some pseudo-religious practices have certain tenets where they don't deal with vaccinations. Our people, of course, when we deal with our ancestral culture, root work, conjure and so forth, that is part of the Hoodoo tradition, but as any Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit tradition has a segment of the tradition that deals with natural medicine, root work, and so forth. We put together that document. The document is linked in the video for this as well as on our website and so forth. You can read the entire document. We put that forward, and people all over the country, our people all over the country and in different parts of the world asked us about the document. We sent it out to them. They were able to maintain their employment as well as going to school and so forth. So we have a special guest today, Mama Kandice. She is from Washington, D.C. She is an artist, and one of her pieces is right here. She's also a digital photographer. She's also a certified instructor in traditional North African dance. And she's also the head of the Parent Advisory Council on the Independent African Center Charter School here in Washington, D.C. And one of the reasons I wanted to talk to Kandice about this, as well, we're going to get into some other stuff as well, is because, sometimes there's a bureaucracy with regard to trying to get these exemptions through, especially when schools are saying, you need to have something on record saying that you have a religious exemption, that you're claiming your religious exemption. They're not giving it to you, but you're claiming it because it's part of natural law, of course, but it's also set forth in statute, in the Constitution and so forth. So Well, first of all, again, I'll say for coming on to the podcast.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Of course. So, when you went through the process, in fact, what was the process when the school said, okay, if your child can't come to school unless they get vaccinated, they can override the vaccination if they have a religious exemption. So, what was your process for going through that?
Well, first I went to a virtual orientation at another African Center school.
Okay.
And I found out from there that the doctor's note, the letter from your doctor's office, was no longer valid.
Okay.
So you had to fill out a form, you had to file a religious exemption form at your local health department.
Okay.
So it's just interesting. Prior to COVID, the note from your doctor was valid, and after that they were like, they're no longer accepting doctor's notes. So I saved the form, and then when I went to go register for school, they were saying that, of course, again, the no doctor's note, you can't register, you have to register to the DC Health Department. And to my knowledge, nobody had done that successfully.
Okay.
Nobody had achieved like the status where they had filed it, everything went through, so it was a lot of it was still some uncertainty, and there was a lot of kind of like, it was just unclear of how the process worked. But thankfully, I reached out to you and you shared your document with me, located the health department, filed it, wrote everything in the description. They told me they would get back to me in a couple of days and let me know that, and it looked good, everything went through just fine. But for a while, I was the only one at this school where everything had gone through successfully. They filed the exemption, and it's still on file from the school. So your document helped a lot of other people, a lot of other parents at the school follow like a template or a guideline of how to successfully file the exemption, the religious exemption, at the DC Health Department.
Okay. So now, had parents, before you were able to go through, did they tell you about certain challenges they had, or were they getting like the runaround? I'm sure if it happened in DC, it's happening in different locales across the country.
Mm-hmm.
But were they running into obstacles with that?
Yeah, it was a miscommunication between OSSI, which is the Office of Superintendent here in DC, and the DC Health Department. It was like there was software or something, like there was some missing link of how the schools would access the exemption.
Okay.
So that was really convoluted in the beginning. I actually had to make like 3 to 4 different trips.
Okay.
Every single time, like an alert popped up. It was like, your child is due for this, vaccination. So we need for you to either produce a document saying they're exempt or get the child vaccinated. So that was, somewhat tedious, but I think we're completely locked in now. So once you filed, like that's it. You shouldn't get any notifications from your school, but it should be finalized.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so the relevant section of the Section 7 of the Civil Rights Act, and it talks about, you claiming your religious exemption and religious accommodations for that. So when you have, and it goes back to the First Amendment of the Constitution, so the freedom of, religion and so forth. And when they talk about the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause of the First Amendment, so if someone says, well, that's not a legitimate religion, then they're violating the Constitution, because you cannot establish, just by virtue of the fact somebody tries to say that's not a legitimate religion, they're trying to establish what religion is and what religion is not. So if you give the tenets of your religion, if your employer or the school asks you, well, it's a religious exemption, what religion are you talking about? You don't have to give them the tenets if you don't want to.
Right.
Now, we put forward a 4-page document, and we go into detail cosmologically about, not just with regard to Hoodoo, but all Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit, African Ancestral Religious practices. We have the same cosmological structure. You don't have to give them that. Now, when you gave it, you said that, what did the lady say when you put all that information?
Well, first of all, it's a very thorough document. You didn't miss a mark on anything. But, and I was filling in the description, like she literally said, she was like, oh, you didn't have to write all of that. She's like, you didn't have to, it was a couple of sentences, it was maybe like 2 paragraphs or such.
Okay.
But I went, and at first I took the document with me, and I'm gonna keep it real, like I was a little nervous because I didn't know what to really expect. It was my first time filing for a religious vaccination exemption, and I'm the only one in my family of my siblings to have cultivated this type of lifestyle where I had exercised my right to choose how I want to raise my children and my family. So sometimes acting solo on that, I mean, it's an act of sovereignty, but there is some fear because it's the unknown. Once you're going against the system, you're not quite sure if you're doing the right thing. But one of my best friends always says, like, you have to take a stand for your family. So, you pray to your ancestors, you ask for guidance, and then, once that confirmation comes through, then you just move forward. But after I started filling out the description of the tenets of my religion, spiritual practices, she literally was like, she's like, oh, you wrote so much, you didn't even have to write all of that. I was like, is this really that easy? So it's like this scare around it. I feel like there's the hype and the scare around it can kind of get you to back out of it before you actually move forward through it. But I didn't have to write as much as I did. It was fairly simple. I turned it in. They didn't interview me. I'm like, they're going to call me back in the room. They want to prove what is this? Because it's very thorough. And then somebody reading that, I would feel like slightly, like if I was in their office, I would be a little intimidated because I'm just like, oh, well, just that document alone, I would be like, whoever this person is or who's ever created this document, whatever their practice is, let's just go ahead and put this through because they probably do not understand what it says. Right. But it's pretty straightforward and it's thorough. So it worked.
And the thing is, we wanted to make it thorough like that for two reasons. One, again, you don't have to lay out your entire religion. There's a great deal of case law stating that whatever one says is their religious belief, that's considered religious belief. If you wake up tomorrow and say, I believe in aliens, that's my religion, and you go and say, this is my religious belief, if they say, well, that's not a legitimate religion, then they're violating the establishment clause of the First Amendment. Yeah. And then with regard to employment or going to school, people need the document for their children to go to college and so forth. Because some were saying, well, they can come on the campus, but if they don't have an exemption or if they're not vaccinated, then they have to do it virtually. So you're spending all this money to send your child to college and live on campus and have the campus experience, and they're like, well, they can't stay on campus.
And meanwhile, a dog can come into a restaurant and eat while you're eating.
Right.
It's like pets have more rights, what I'm saying, on freedoms than we do. Right. And they're animals. So I think that's really ridiculous that you have to have all these vaccinations just to go into a building.
Right. And it's an agenda. But that's why we made it detailed, because we know this in some instances they would try to push back. So if they try to say, well, on one hand, that's not a real religion, then, they're in violation. If they say, you're still going to have to do that, then we can prove that's violating the free exercise clause. If somebody's if you say this is against my sincerely held religious belief, that's the language in the statute. If you say this is against my sincerely held religious belief, and you just give a basic reason, then if they say no and they can't provide, the statute says reasonable accommodations for your religious belief and so forth, then they're in violation. So we gave that detailed analysis for legal purposes, just in case because some people did get pushed back. Some people didn't know their rights and so forth. Their employer tried to push back and say, well, what do you mean you practice hoodoo? You know what I'm saying? So, but when we gave that detailed explanation, there's nothing they can say against the explanation. We show the whole cosmological breakdown of why we don't, engage in, these fake vaccines and so forth. So we did it for legal purposes, but also for like you said, it gave you some more confidence once you had that detailed analysis put it in front of somebody. But some people were getting pushback. They were getting pushback from their employers. They were pushing them hard. They were getting pushback and trying to intimidate people like, well, your son is just not going to go to college this year. They won't be able to stay on campus. We ended up, shifting, and our son went to a different school because we weren't about to do that.
That's the thing, and that's how they get you kind of trapped, because it's like you have all of these hopes and dreams and plans for your children, but somebody come along and say, oh, well, they can't go to this school that you've always probably had plans for your child to go to school. It can be a bit discouraging, and I think, that's how some people can fold. But yeah, but I mean, my only advice would be to just not back down. Just like, okay, well, there's other schools, and we'll just keep searching for, other institutions that will honor this, our exemption, because eventually, like, they're going to have to be compliant, because they're going to be losing, they're going to be under-enrolled, they're going to be underfunded. But there's power in numbers, so you cannot be afraid of these institutions, and you just stand up for your beliefs and what you believe in. But, definitely for sure don't back down. And on the document that you have curated, I love how, at the bottom, at the last page, you put who you are, you know what I'm saying, and you put your picture. It's just like, it's like this stamp, because it's like, I dare you to come. It's like, come and see me about this if you want to.
Right.
But I was
website, email.
You gave them everything but your address. And I was just like, are you concerned? Like, and I was like, well, can I share this with other people? Like, yeah, share with everybody. I'm like, but what if they, and I'm my mind, I'm like, if they try to contact you, or like, what, it's like, you just don't back down. So, yeah.
So, and then with our son, so we sent him he was going to go to one HBCU.
Mm-hmm.
They, like the Negroes that they are, they tried to find a way around it. They couldn't really get around the religious exemption, because that would be in violation of the law. So their policy was, he can still come to school, he just can't stay on campus, which is ridiculous. So of course the vaccine does not prevent, the transmission of anything. It doesn't cure anything, it doesn't do anything. It's just poisoning our people, and we understand that. So he went to a different HBCU, still used the religious exemption, and they accepted that. I just had another brother who reached out to me because his son has just graduated. He's going to an HBCU, and he's not getting the vaccination. He knows better than that, but he wanted that just in case, that detailed document, just in case they wanted to try to push back. We can, give that. So basically, in the document, we just talk about what ancestral religion is. So of course, Hoodoo is Akan ancestral religion in North America. We mentioned Juju, which is from the Yoruba term Ju, meaning the cast to throw. That's Yoruba ancestral religion in North America. Voodoo is Ewe ancestral religion in North America. Grigri, for example, is Mindi ancestral religion in North America, and so forth. So we talk about the different expressions, the Kemetic ancestral tradition and so forth, so-called Kemetic. So no matter what expression of ancestral religion you practice, fundamentally we have the same, approach. The ritual incorporation of divine law and the ritual restoration of divine balance. So Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit, or African ancestral religion, no matter what form it takes, is the ritual incorporation of divine law and the ritual restoration of divine balance. That means through ritual we incorporate those things, objects, deeds, and entities we need to incorporate in order to align our thoughts, intentions, and actions with divine order. And through ritual we restore balance to our thoughts, intentions, and actions by incorporating those things, objects, deeds, and entities we need to restore balance to our thoughts, intentions, and actions. So the ritual incorporation of divine law and the ritual restoration of divine balance, those are the expansive and contractive poles of ancestral religion. So we have plant life, animal life, mineral life, and Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit, human life, African black human life, and Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit, African black human life only. Of course, only black people can practice Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit, or African ancestral religion. So of course, if you see somebody talking about they're practicing hoodoo and it's a cracker, or an Asian, or pseudo-Native American, or white Hispanic, of course, they're 100% fraud. Only our people can practice ancestral religion. They are racially incapable of practicing any form of ancestral religion. So we talk about plant life, animal life, mineral life, Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit, human life. So the ritual incorporation of divine law through plant life, if you're incorporating plant life, you're strengthening yourself, vitamins, minerals, herbs, and so forth. The same thing dealing with animal totems and the spiritual forces that animate them. The deities that govern certain animals, and they have certain energy complexes, and we're connected to that. Mineral life and so forth. On the expansive side, incorporation, that's strengthening, edification, development, growth, expansion. That's the expansive pole of utilizing plant life, animal life, mineral life, and human life. On the contractive side, the restoration of divine balance, this is where the document comes in. The restoration is when you're trying to heal. So if you're using plant life to strengthen yourself, that's expansive. If you're trying to heal yourself, to eradicate disease, that's contractive. So you look at plant life, animal life, mineral life, and human life. You look at the plant and mineral side, the contractive pole of ancestral religion. That's where the healing aspect comes in. And so we talk about cosmologically, we utilize plant life and mineral life to heal ourselves, to make medicines, procure, medicine from different, herbs and so forth in the forest, certain kinds of mixtures guided by our ancestresses and ancestors, the Odwirafo, as well as the Abosom, the divinities, the forces in nature, and this is how we do that. So, dealing with that, now we want to get into this notion of ritual offering. Mm-hmm. Because that's what it is. When we go out and the landscape out here, you can see the trees and forests and so forth. When we go out into nature and we communicate with the spirits that animate plant life, the spirits that animate animal life, the spirits that animate mineral life, and of course we are the human trines, black people only, of course, for the forces in nature. When we engage them, they can guide us towards specific admixtures, remedies, certain curated, intermingling of plant life and mineral life for things to heal our people. And then we heal ourselves, but we also give offerings to the divinities and so forth. One thing, I sent you that article, and they're talking about a certain kind of bacteria that's in the soil that generates or basically stimulates the secretion of serotonin. Mm-hmm. So they'll say soil is an antidepressant. Mm-hmm. Now, of course, we've known that, for thousands of years. Yes. When we go on Asase Afua, the fertile earth mother, or Asase Ya, the barren earth mother, and so forth, we naturally engage that. We engage her spiritually, that spirit that animates the earth and so forth, those twin sister earth divinities, but we also engage them just physiologically. Mm-hmm. And you were telling me about a couple of instances where you were already engaged in that. Now they call it earthing. Mm-hmm. Crackers going to come up with different names, pretending like they've discovered something that we've been doing all along. Mm-hmm. But when they talk about stepping on the soil, helps us secrete, that certain bacteria helps us secrete serotonin, which stimulates that external, generating energy externally, so it's a so-called antidepressant. Mm-hmm. But you were already doing that naturally without utilizing a certain terminology, yes, but being led by your Odwirafo ancestresses and ancestors to do that. So you had a couple of, you told me about, two of them. One with your daughter when she was young, and then when she was older.
No, when she was older. Oh, so the story when she was younger, so my daughter, my oldest daughter, she's 9 now, but I think she was around 3 years old. And so she's a Monday born, which is all sets. So that's water, emotion, and she just would go to like these crying spells. And I would burn sage, I was like trying to console her. Anything that a mother can think of to do, I did. But nothing I was doing was cutting through. I'm like nothing is helping. Like, I don't know what's going on with her. I was like getting a little nervous. So then I literally just picked her up and I carried her outside to where we used to live in the backyard. And I just took her shoes off and I put her feet in the grass, right on the earth. And then like she stopped, the crying slowed, and then I was able to communicate with her and she was able to like calm down and respond like instantly. And it's really interesting when you talk about like the earthing mats, Right. I did invest in one because I learned that it's not like foreign to us to melanated people to experience seasonal depression in the wintertime. Right. It's because we're inside and we're not outside as much. I know I don't like being cold, but I hate the cold, which means that we're normally going to be more inclined to stay indoors. So I was like, okay, well, doing some research on earthing mats. I'm like, well, let me see if this will help me, like kind of just like boost my levels and to help boost the vitamin D or whatever. But there's no substitute for the sun. So having somebody brand or come up with a technology called an earthing mat, I mean, like you shared, like it really just reselling or repackaging something, back to us or whatever. But so the second incident, we were taking public transportation to school, and there was like arguments were like happening just throughout the bus. And I'm like, okay, so as soon as we got off of the bus on our way to school.
And she was older at this point.
Yeah, she was older. So this was a couple of weeks ago. So she's 9, and all the children, like we were all, doing the morning drop off to school. So once we got off, the only thing I could think of, I was like, well, everybody has their shoes, socks on, and they're ready to go. So I found like a nice area with grass, and I had everybody put their hands into the grass just to try to help transmute some of that negative energy that we picked up on the way. So I really take like set intentions before I send them off to school in the morning. So I had already done the intention setting. We already had like the prayers and the incantation and the chants going. But then we were in a space where I felt like it wouldn't really benefit them to go from what we had just experienced and right into the building. So once we got off the bus, I had them put their hands in the grass, and then just to, so the earth could just absorb some of that negative energy, and it worked pretty instantly.
And so that's one of those things where you would talk about how you were engaged in ritual practice, and then when you may not know the specific terminology, but once you start researching these things, like in the Akan tradition, you find out these are things that we were doing all along. And so that also includes.
And then the earth is, this is our shrine, so also we have everything, like whatever problem, like she has a solution. So, it's just a very large altar space.
And what was how did they respond afterwards? What was your assessment afterwards, once they took their hands out of the earth? How was it?
They were good. They didn't seem affected by what we had just witnessed or experienced. But they seemed pretty good afterwards.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now I want to talk about. Kandice is a Akua, Wednesday born. So when you think about Akua in the Akan tradition, of course we have the Abosom that animate the solar, lunar, and planetary bodies that govern the 7-day week. And these divinities are forces in creation, so all Afuraitkaitnit people, African Black people, invoke these divinities according to their culture. The manner in which we cultivated a relationship with these divinities in Akan culture is they will send us into the world based on the day of the week that they govern, whichever solar, lunar, planetary body that governs that day, that energy is bathing the earth, dominant at the beginning of the day and so forth. They make sure we come into the world on that day to indicate to the community that we were assigned to them pre-incarnation when we came into the womb. So Akua, if you hear somebody named Akua or Ekua or Aquia, that is a woman born on Akuada, which is Wednesday, and the divinity is Akua. And in ancient Kemet, for example, she's called Nebet-Het, and she's the wife of Set. And of course, Set is the trickster and the messenger, and he governs the desert and so forth. In the Akan tradition, Kwaku Anansi, he's the trickster, he's the messenger of the Supreme Being. He also governs the desert and so forth. He's the divine communicator. In Yoruba, that's Legba. In Yoruba, that's Eshu, Elegba, Alegbara, and so forth. In Vodun, that's Legba. But in Yoruba is Eshu, and then the wife of Eshu is Agberu. And Agberu means the load bearer, so she carries the offerings on her head with she carries the offerings that we give to the divinities and the ancestral spirits on her head. She's the wife of the communicator and the trickster. In ancient Kemet, the trickster is Set. He's also the communicator of Ra and so forth, the divine messenger. And his wife is the load bearer. So Nebet-Het has the vessel on her head, and she's the only female divinity with the vessel on her head. In Akan, it's Akua, and her male counterpart is Kwaku, which is Kwaku Anansi. He's the trickster, he's the messenger. And Akua is the divinity. You see her with the Akua Badal and so forth. But her praise name, Kukua, in Akan means an earthen vessel. She is literally the vessel that carries the offerings that we give to the Abosom, the deities, and the Nananom and Samanfo, the spiritually cultivated ancestresses and ancestors. She carries those offerings just like Kwaku Anansi carries the messages. But that whole notion of ritual offering, people talk about things like manifestation. That's just a term that people are using. You know what I'm saying? Conjure is the term that we use, kanche, but they're using manifestation. Kalinda mentioned that in the first piece. But you do many offerings. And even before you knew about Akua, you were already on that path for years and years and years, like 20 plus years. So you already knew. But you did something recently. And you don't have to give the entire thing, but it's instructive though. So what was the nature of that offering you did on that particular day?
On a Wednesday,
Right.
no
less. Right.
Like if you pay attention closely to the day that you were born, for me, I see the most significance of the offerings and the communication, the spirit communication, on Wednesdays. So I recently left an offering at the crossroads at a brand new Black woman-owned business. So it's very successful, very inspiring local shop owner. Has her own business. She's also hired a lot of other sisters, and they have their own businesses inside of this very beautiful location. And I've been meaning to go over there for some time, but just so happened to be riding past there, and I was like, oh, okay, this is the spot. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, this is like the crossroad. This is a cross street right here. So I'm like, okay, cool. And I'm like looking through my bag for some coins, for some candy. And I mean, it's all just very, it wasn't planned. It's always just like very intuitive. And I left the offering right at the cross street, and just said a prayer, said whatever I needed to say, left the offering there. And then I went even further. So there's this, and a couple of like hoodoo books. It would say things like collect some dirt from a bank. And put it on like your ancestral shrine, or like an abundance or prosperity or money shrine, or carry some in your pocket, or carry some in a mojo bag. Well, the idea of that is like, so the soil is from that of a bank, which is money, transactions, you know what I'm saying? Everything you looking for, some like money rituals, like, oh yeah, go and get some dirt from a bank. And also, within that ritual, you're also supposed to, or quote unquote supposed to, also leave an offering of coins. So, in this instance, this is my very first time doing this. Actually, I collected some dirt from the sites of the Black-owned business, and then said a prayer over it. First, you have to give thanks, and you also have to give something for collecting that dirt. Because to think about, that was a thought in somebody's mind. All of the blueprints that had to go down, the planning, the preparation, the hiring. I think she also ran into some complications with different contractors, having to try a couple of people, different contractors, different, builders, furniture. Just everything. I thought about everything that went into the process. Like, we're looking at the finished result, but all of that blood, sweat, tears, frustrations, and she's expressed those frustrations, publicly on social media. So I thought about all of that, and then I just gave thanks for the space, asked for it to continue to be blessed with abundance and continued success. And after I collected the dirt, I put an offering in the ground. It's like I just left a payment for that. So I collected it. It's highly energetic. I have it. I carry it with me. I have some in my house. I also carry some with me because I too have my own ideas and things and visions of having like a brick and mortar, like my own space. So to see that, a sister has had that thought and then it's actually coming to fruition, it just lets me know like it's possible for myself or for anybody. So yeah, so that was the most recent thing that I've done. And then leaving the offering at the cross streets in the shape of a cross. So can you talk more about what that shape? That wasn't intentional, but it just so happened to come out. The offering came out as a shape of a cross at a cross street. So, I didn't do that intentionally. It just so happened like it formed its own shape as I laid them down, as I laid the offerings down.
No, that's what was interesting to see that, the way you laid it out, the way you described it and so forth. So very often people talk about leaving an offering for Eshu at the crossroads, or Legba at the crossroads, and as we said, Kwaku Anansi, in his form as the great communicator between us and Inyamewa, which is the great god, Inyame and Akan, and Inyamewa, the great goddess, and so forth. And there's a Nansi Sim, or quote unquote a Nansi stories, talking about how the stories of all of creation used to belong to Nyankompon, who's the creator of the universe, the same as Ra and Kemet. But then because of Anansi's wisdom, those stories, instead of being called Nyankon Sim, meaning the stories or the knowledge of Nyankompon, the creator, they were given to Anansi because of his wisdom, and now he's the owner of all the stories, and they're called Anansi Sim. When you look at Anansi stories, Anansi Sim, all the cosmology, the various divinities are in the story. So even though a lot of the stories are talking about trickery and stuff like that, when you look at the different characters, they're talking about different deities, their functions in creation. It's the whole layout. So he's the owner of all the stories in the world. He's the communicator of all the stories on Earth. He's called Anansi Kokroko and Akan, the great Anansi, the great spider, the great communicator. So, but he governs the cross from heaven to earth and earth to heaven, crossing from the physical realm to the spirit realm. He goes back and forth. He's the communicator, carrying our messages back and forth and so forth. But when you look at the wife of Anansi is Akua, and we'll put an image on the screen. We'll put an image, as a link for one of our documents. You see the fertility doll, the so-called fertility doll, the Akua doll, and so forth. It's in the shape of an ankh, in the shape of the two arms are out, the thin body, the ovular head, and so forth. That is a cross. And we're not talking about the pseudo-Christian cross of the fictional cartoon character Jesus or Yeshua, because of course he didn't exist in any form or of any race. We always have to reiterate that. There wasn't a black one, there wasn't a white one. He didn't exist. We got to get over that. But the Akua doll is in the shape of the ankh, of course, that original quote-unquote cross, but her body with the two arms, the body, the head, and so forth, that is a cross in and of itself. When we look at ancient Kemet, we trace that crossroads hieroglyph from Medu, going all the way back to Kemet and so forth. And then when you look at the Bakongo, Dikinga, that cosmogram and so forth, people often look at that as a crossroads symbol, but in our Akan culture we have the same thing. The Okra Komuwadie, the so-called soul pendant of the soul and so forth is worn by the soul washers of the sovereign. That is the exact same cosmological structure. We'll put an image of that so you can see that as well, but that's the form that you actually used. When you look at the term, and this is one of those things where you're doing something that the divinity that governs your head, Nana Akua, directed you to do. And you do exactly what she told you to do. And then when you look at the details later, it lines up with Akan culture. So Aku is the name of the divinity. The term Aku or Eku also means fertile land or soil. And you went and got some fertile soil on Akua Da, which is Wednesday, the Da or the day of Nana Akua, and you reached into the Eku, the soil, and you took the soil, but then you also gave an offering. And it's not just coins like, okay, I gave a 25-cent coin or, whatever. It's metal. You gave a mineral. You took mineral life, which is Eku, the fertile, land, but you also gave a mineral and put it back into the earth. There was an exchange. One of the titles of Kwaku Anansi or Aku, Awuku, he's called Aku Sika, and Sika means money or gold. It means gold, but it means money. He governs media of exchange, transactions, anything transactional. So they'll talk about he decides for you how you spend your money. So they're saying he's controlling, but at the same time he's the one that governs money. On the masculine side, he's called Aku Sika, or Aku, the one who governs gold or money or transactional implements. On the feminine side, Akua governs Sika. She's Akua Sikawa. She's the one that governs money or media of exchange and so forth. That's why they say in Yoruba that Eshu is in the bank, because he governs media of exchange, which is any form of money, whether it's cowrie shells, now paper money, gold, whatever it is, those are media of exchange. So he governs that. So for her to tell you, to go somewhere that's like a deposit, you got the soil, you return the mineral life into the Aku, you did it on her day, you did it in the form of a cross, and her whole body is a cross. That's one of those, examples of the Hoodoo tradition still alive. Nana Akua speaking to her daughter, Nana Akua, and she's doing everything in alignment with that specific expression of energy.
Yeah, it's so fascinating because sometimes you're looking for, well, personally, me, sometimes I'm looking for something like super grandiose. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, what am I supposed to be looking for? What am I supposed to be doing? But sometimes it's also very subtle, but the reaction to something grandiose and something subtle, it has the same like energy, it has the same reaction. Like once you like do a recall of what you just experienced, and then you start to see the different signs of the, you know, confirmation of where that came from.
Right.
It's really fascinating. Like, oh my gosh, like that's what that was, or that's what that was. So it's fascinating. And I think that it's very interesting how sometimes, you know, we say something told me to do this, or something told me. Sometimes people are like, well, the Lord told me to do, you know, X, Y, and Z, but it's really the deity that's governing, you know, your head of the, you know, the day that you were born. And the more that you make offerings, you take time to sit and communicate, like you all shared earlier, the last podcast, doing a head washing, so you can get clear on the message that you're receiving, and get even, you know, clear guidance on what you're supposed to be doing.
Right.
Yeah.
No, that's interesting, and it's so many things that we do, especially with regard to the Hoodoo tradition, that like every step that you took, whether it was, a number of people will go to a crossroads because that's, you know, all of our traditions deal with that. That specific form that you use, that you were directed to form the offering in, that is the specific form of the Odwirafo, you know, soul washer's badge that represents the Kra, the divinity, and the form of Akua herself, and then the Aku with the soil, and that's Akua, and, you know, on her day specifically. And it was a woman who's dealing with business, you know, it's a woman's business, that whole business. But you come to DC, you just look at Black woman-owned business DC, or business consortium or whatever, you will find it, you know, a lot of people have been talking about it. But just to go to that particular space, and we just happen to, you know, you just happen to roll up on the space.
It was so random. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm like, we're here. I've been trying to get over here for so long. So, and the business was closed, but I was equally as excited to be on the outside of the business, because I know, just had an idea of what it took to have that come to fruition, and just historically of, you know, what it took to have your own business, just being a melanated person on this land. You know what I'm saying? So I feel like pretty much anything that we can do as it pertains to our sovereignty or independence is a revolutionary act. So just to be able to be a witness to what the sister had accomplished in itself, without even going into the store, it was just amazing to be in the presence of it alone. So I thoroughly enjoyed just being on the outside, energetically experiencing it, without having to be, you know, in the four walls of the establishment.
Right.
Yeah.
And the final piece of it was, it was closed. It was late at night. All the lights were out. You do the ritual, and it's probably like, what, maybe
after 9 or something.
Yeah, 9:30, something like that. And, you know, they close like probably around 6 or something. And of course, there are people across the street, like, what are they doing?
Right.
Pouring up, putting stuff on the sidewalk and so forth. And grabbing the soil and making a deposit, you know, in the soil and so forth. But as soon as the deposit was made and the prayers were finished, and somebody opened the door and came out the business, and all the lights were out, and just popped out of the business and came and, you know, went and did something.
Yeah.
So then kind of looked around and went back in, but you know, very often that's a little signature that was the completion of the process.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's like sometimes, like, I can see how people are a little intimidated. Like if you're doing something ritualistic outside, and you're like, well, what if somebody comes? Or, you know, I used to think that, but like once you're moved or inclined to do it, I found that you can, from the inception to the completion of a ritualistic act, you will actually be like, you're unbothered until it's complete.
Right.
Yeah, nobody comes around, nobody's bothering, or if somebody has walked by, I feel like, whatever, I mean, because you're in a zone, or you're being guided to do the thing that you're instructed to do, so your concern is not with who's around. Like once you really, you know, your intentions are set, like that's what you're gonna do. And like the brother came out when I was complete, so I was like, okay, yeah. He could have come out any other time, but he didn't.
Right.
Yeah. So that was interesting.
And he didn't trip or.
Yeah, he didn't inquire. So.
And most they're intrigued about what's going on, because as soon as you do something like that, and that whirlwind of, you know, energy starts moving, it's gonna stimulate their inner Samantha as well, their ancestors and ancestors as well, because they're like, why aren't you doing this for us? You see what they don't look at what they're doing.
Yeah.
And why aren't you doing this when you go home? So they're you know, they can't unsee it. So when they get in the car and they drive home, they go to sleep. They're in Samantha working on them, like, yeah, you saw them doing something.
Yeah.
You need to get back.
Yeah, you saw them doing something, you're not quite sure what they were doing.
Right.
But then it's like that seed is then planted in your mind, so then you're kind of like, okay, then you start to get ideas or whatever. The same thing happened to me in this neighborhood. There's a women and children shelter just a few blocks away.
Okay.
And I remember walking past there, and I just remember like some of the women that would walk by with their children. And I'm always speaking to people, but I can never get their eyes. Like I wait to meet a person's eye before I can speak to them. They would never really look up. And I myself, once upon a time, have had experience with, you know, family shelters or whatever. So I knew exactly what, you know, the women were, you know, potentially going through. So it wasn't until like I started to pour libation on the sites of the shelter. Just made some prayers, left some offerings, pour libations. Just right outside of the space. I probably did that maybe once or twice, and then after that, it's like all the women that I would see coming down that street, we would have conversations all the time. They would talk to me in the store, they would be talking to me, we would talk to each other's children. So the communication, it opened up after that. Right. You know what I'm saying? So that's just another like confirmation of the ritual or the life. And I didn't do that for that, but I felt the need to do something. I'm like, okay, well, maybe I'm supposed to be here. Like, it's like pour out water here, say a prayer here. And then after that, like I was able to just communicate with them. So, because I had that experience, so I know what that was like. So just to offer a word of encouragement or just, you know, say hello, say hi to the children, have our children meet or play with one another. So, yeah, and things like that are happening to me. Like happen to me all the time. I always have something to offer. It's just randomly. Crystals to the river, coins, candies at the crossroads. And then now my children do it. They're like pouring water out wherever we go by the tree, and they'll just start saying, you know, Ashe. So they do that everywhere we go as well. But the balance comes in because I feel like I'm such a big giver, always offering. So the balance comes in where I have to be able to receive. Yeah, yes. I have issues with receiving. So because I take like really seriously like the offerings that I make. So it's like when it comes back around, it's actually, that's a part of the balance is also receiving.
That's true. And, you know, we talked about that before. I'm kind of the same way. It's a constant, you know, we give out things for free, we give out books for free and classes and different things like that. But you're right, it's like that balance of being able or open to receive at least a portion of, you know, that reciprocity.
We're taking this short break to let our viewers and listeners know about our 9 archived online Hoodoo courses. We conducted a series of 9 courses online. Some of them are 4-week courses, some of them are 6-week courses. All 9 courses are available as a special for our listeners for $50 for the entire 9-course Hoodoo set. Trustery, cosmology, ritual medicine, divination, and more. Simply go to our website, odwirafo.com, on the Akongwa Suya page, and you can access all 9 courses. Now, back to our interview.
But it's interesting you said about the children. So some people will be intimidated, especially if nobody else in their family is practicing anything. And then they need to go to a river or go to a tree or go, you know, and they're strongly led to do it. And most people end up doing it, and they have that experience, like you said, once they're in the zone, then everything else is blocked out. And they go through the ritual process, they engage the ancestral spirits and divinities the way they need to, and then they're back, and then regular activity happens. But you're saying, since you do that with the children, so they're starting off, you know, not being concerned about any of that.
Yeah.
They're starting off on the right track. So how do they, you kind of talked about it, how do they express or assess what's going on? How do they feel about, you know, just engaging in ritual?
They love it. When we're here, if we made like a portion of our food goes to our ancestral shrine, so I'll let each of them take turns putting the food over there. I let them walk over there together. But I tell them, I'm like, listen, you all gonna have to do this for me one day. I'm like, is this like so selfish or whatever? But I'm like, you all gonna have to, you know, do this for me. So I just walk them through everything. And even having family over, so the thing is also just standing really firm on your practices, because if you have people over your house, like my family, like once upon a time I was a little intimidated about what they would say, what they would think. One time I had everyone over for dinner. I had a reading by a Baba here in Washington, D.C. He gave me instructions on the family dinner, told me to have all of my siblings over, which the relationship between, at that time, between some of my family was a little estranged. So he instructed me to set a plate, do a place setting at the table for my mother, who passed away when I was 11. And so when my family comes in, they're like, okay, so who's this plate for? I'm like, well, you know, that's a place setting at the table for mom, like it's an offering. They were like, you know, was she coming to eat it? Like, what's going on here? And I'm like, well, no. I'm like, you know, this is an offering. Like, it's just in memory of, you know what I'm saying, the matriarch of our families who's no longer here. But the children, they do that. They will make a plate. They'll put some food aside on their plates. They'll ask for fruit to take outside for an offering. I know they're pretty generous with things that they have. Like they're always, you know, willing to share. But they like that. They know the candle is over here. They see all the elements that we have here: plants, all the minerals, crystals, water. My grandfather really loved coffee. And then sometimes you think you're doing these things and you're not getting a response, or you're not hearing from your ancestors and Samanfo. So there was one time that my daughter, like she cries about my mother often, my oldest daughter who's 9, and she has never met her. And she will cry and it's like, I wish that's no fair, you got to see her and I never met her before, and I'm like, so what do I do about that? So one night we were in my room, all of my baby were reading a book. And she started getting upset. I'm like, well, she's here with us. I'm like, she's in the house and we can't see her, but I know she's here. And my intentions are like saying, to console my child.
Right.
But I'm like, okay, she's here. And in my mind, I'm like, okay, she's got to be here. Like, can you please be here? So I'm like, of course she's here. So I'm like, okay, well, Mom, if you're here, can you just let us know that you're here, because Hunter really misses you and she loves you and she wish she could have met you. So then we continued reading the book. And then as I was reading, I came across the word fruits. And my mother had an accent. She was from East St. Louis, Illinois. Mm-hmm. So she could never pronounce the word fruit. She always said fute.
Right.
So when I came across the word fruit in the book, instead of saying fruits, which I've always said, I've never said it any other way, I read the word as futes. And I was like, it was emotional, but I was so surprised. I was like, oh my gosh. So I was explaining to her what had just happened. I was like, your grandmother used to say fute. I said, and I've never said that like that. I said, so just by not even misreading the word, but pronouncing it in a way that she pronounced it, just let me know that she was here with us.
Right.
So it's like it's subtle, but you have to be still and quiet enough to know. And, like you all said, share this. Continue doing the head cleansing, and then sitting, like carving out the space so you can sit and actually receive the messages and receive the guidance. And I mean, they're pretty much always here. But I asked in faith, like, okay, you have to be here because, this is your granddaughter. She's super emotional. Like, please tell me you're around. And then when that, that pronunciation of the word came through, I'm like, okay, so she's here. Yeah.
Right. That's powerful, and it's the fact that she orchestrated that event, so you all could be reading a book, a book that would have the word fruit in it. So
Right.
something very specific at that specific time that you could grab right in front of you that could be an indication.
Yes.
And then, like you said before, it starts off as, sometimes inclinations or pulls, like you said, it can be very subtle. It's not always, it's not like some smoke rises up and the spirit is standing in front of you. But eventually, over time, the more you engage, they will show themselves. And sometimes they won't show themselves to you clairvoyantly. And everybody doesn't have to be a super clairvoyant to see them.
Yes.
They will show themselves in the corner of the eye. They'll show themselves faintly, briefly, because they know, even though some of us pretend like, oh, I want to see them. They know if you're in a house by yourself and you've been conditioned for 20, 30 years to be fearful, if they showed up fully,
oh yeah,
you'd be...
It'll be over.
Right.
Like, taking this shrine down, no,
Right.
Can't do this anymore. Yeah, you would be afraid.
Right. But they'll start off showing little faint things, like very faint, maybe their leg or arm or just something very faint,
Yeah.
or movement in the corner of the eye. But once you become more comfortable, they will show them.
Yeah, that's happened to me twice actually with my mother. So at my old apartment, I was sitting on the bed. It was really quiet in my house. I'm not quite sure if I had children at this point. But when I was sitting on my bed, I felt something kind of sit with me. What used to happen at first, I would always feel a bump at the end of my bed. It's like the kind of motion where somebody is trying to walk past the bed,
Right.
and I'm just recalling this. I've completely forgot about this. It's like somebody would walk past the bed, but they would bump the edge of the bed. So much so, and I would move as a reverb, kind of in response to, but I never was afraid. It never scared me. I'm like, oh, okay, whoever that is, they're in here. I didn't know if it was my grandmother, my mother, or what. But one particular time, as I was sitting on the bed, something sat down with me, and kind of I can't really say entered me, but it was the silhouette of a person who I definitely know it was my mother. Because at that point when I was looking down on my feet, but I could feel, and I'm very familiar with even though she's been gone for, so long, she passed when I was 11, I could feel the shape of her face, the bone structure, I literally felt like her in that moment. And I was like, wow, I had never felt that. So it literally felt like she kind of just, I don't know, the silhouette of her kind of just sat with me on my bed. And I was able to I felt like I was seeing through her eyes. I know I couldn't feel the shape of my face. It didn't feel like my face. I was like, wow, that was really interesting. And then last year on my birthday, which was extreme, so many, I don't even know the word for it, so many things had happened on that day. And as I was getting ready that morning, and I looked in the mirror, I could literally see her face in my face. And I could feel it too, because I could feel where her bone structure was, how her eyes sat, because it no longer felt like my face, it felt like her face. I was like, wow, I literally just felt like my mother just now. And also on that day, I witnessed a circular rainbow around the sun, which I've never seen before. So many things, just feathers and seashells and snails. It was like something out of a quote unquote Disney movie. I had never seen that many, that much spirit communication at once.
Right.
So if you can talk about what the rainbow circle around the sun means.
Right. But no, that's that the way she embodied you to a certain extent. That's in Akan culture, the term sunsuma. The term sunsum is the spirit body, and sunsuma is the shadow. It's like the child of the spirit body, so to speak. But that's that kind of akom or possession, that form of possession, where that aspect of the spiritual anatomy will take up residence, embody you to a certain extent. A mild form of spirit possession, that's the most direct communication you can have with the ancestral spirit is spirit possession.
Okay.
The next most is seeing them, hearing them, seeing them in the room, or hearing them speak, or them touching you or something. But the most, direct, and this is your mother, probably your matric clan, and so forth. Spirit possession is the most direct out of anything. Even when people are doing divination and casting shells and so forth, that's good, and it has its place, because you cast the shells, and they have a different pattern, and that different pattern generates a different frequency of energy, and they're resonating at the frequency for a deity to take up residence like a throne and sit there and communicate. But the most direct form of divining is when the spirit possesses somebody. The next level is communicating, seeing, and hearing. The next level after that is certain kinds of implements, but spirit possession, it's no replacement for that. And we've never lost that, of course.
Okay.
So,
can your desire alone to see your Insamampo be enough for you to see them? Or does that have to be your natural gift to be able to see the your Insamampo that are crossed over? Like, can anybody do that, or it has to be a person born with, I guess, whatever energy complex to be able to see them?
that's a good question. I know you want to ask, because I know a lot of people have that question.
Yeah.
So, on one hand, you don't have to be somebody who's a quote-unquote clairvoyant who just came into the world. Like, some of our people born with a veil, with a caul over the face, say, if you're born with a veil, you're somebody who's a seer. And if the baby comes out like that, they're like, oh, this child's going to be a seer, and they start preparing them from the time they're a child to be somebody who engages the hoodoo process as a seer. But you don't have to be a clairvoyant to see your Nsamampo or the Abosom. Again, they will show up sometimes, periodically. The more you engage the ritual process, the more you strengthen your receptors, you'll have the capacity to see or hear or taste or feel, like the 7 gateways to ancestral communication. You have clairvoyance, seeing beyond the physical, clairaudience, where you can hear the spirits communicating, clairgustance, which is the taste, like the different tastes change when the spirit shows up in the room. It may be a sour taste, sweet taste if it's a different kind of energy complex. Clairalience, which is the different smells, like you smell something sour, something sweet, something, those different things. Clairsentience, where you feel some heat move through your body or that spirit move through the room. You can't see them, you can't hear them, but the way you communicate is through clairsentience. And then we have clairequilibrance, which is, you'll lose your sense of balance when the spirit comes through. And then what we call clairtimience, experience time beyond the regular time continuum. You go to a specific space, kind of like you're talking about with regard to during the ritual process. Or you can go in front of the shrine, and when they communicate, you lose track of time. Next thing you know, hours pass, and it felt like it was a minute. Once you engage them like that. Okay. But you don't have to be, a grandmaster teacher. So to see the spirit, they will, on one hand, they will communicate when they need to communicate. But when it comes to ancestral spirits, of course, the honored ones, the spiritually cultivated ones, the non-anonymous Nsamampo will communicate when they need to know and communicate with you. But then those who are not cultivated, some were just people transition, they weren't necessarily spiritually cultivated, but they were nice people. And then other ones who were idiots, you know what I'm saying? Depending on your family, what kind of people you had in your family, that will determine how often they come through. Okay. They're not necessarily concerned about this is the right time and this person's spiritual development. They're just like when they were alive. Some people just show up at your house, some people want to kick it, they want to stay, even beyond the length that they really need to be at your house, and you have to make them bleed, depending on what kind of family you had. Okay. Some of them will show up and try to stay around. Some of them are not happy in the condition that they're at, and they will try to attach themselves to you. Okay. So that's why we get guidance from the spiritually cultivated class, the non-anonymous Nsamampo, because they will give us the right guidance, and they will show up when they need to show up, and if they know you need to be doing something and utilizing your own energy to make something happen, they'll give you guidance on that, but they're not going to do it for you. Okay. Just like, you'll help a child walk, but they need to use these legs that they have. Yeah. You're not going to carry them everywhere. They're not going to be 6 and they're in a bassinet. You know what I'm saying? Right. They have power. We have power. The Nsamampo show us how to use that power based on our, clan affiliation. And the Abosom, the deities, replenish that power within us. But once they replenish it within us, we connect with them through spirit possession or offering. They replenish that energy that they've given us. Then it's time for us to use it to execute our function. Okay. And the Nsamampo will guide us on the use of it based on clan affiliation and how we've used it over the course of centuries and millennia based on clans that we come from, but they're not going to do everything for you. So sometimes people will say, well, I asked the Nsamafo to do something and nothing happened, and what's wrong? This ancestral religion stuff ain't working. If you have a spiritually cultivated elders who was tortured with chains and whips, and they broke free from enslavement, and set up an independent sovereign state and defended their people for generations against crackers and were independent and free, and then you get upset because Starbucks was out of the latte that you like, they're not helping you with that.
Right.
Or you didn't get this job with this girl, made you, you start crying over that. That's not an issue for them.
Right. It's kind of like, you're going to call on me for this?
Right.
Like, of all the things I did, broke free and ran and hid and made it, walked all the way to freedom, you're going to call me about a girl.
Right. So
it makes no sense.
So it's not that they're not there, they don't have the capacity.
Yeah.
I mean, two little boys are fighting. One little boy goes to his father and says, he punched me. Yeah, his father could beat up the other little 4-year-old kid because he's way more powerful. But he's going to say, no, you use the power you have, your arms and legs and feet, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And the skills I taught you, and you utilize your energy to defeat him. And it's the same with the Nsamafo. They will direct us, utilize the power that you've been given, that you inherited from us. The whites in our offspring don't have any sacred power.
Okay.
They don't have any access to divinities or quote-unquote sacred sciences like some of our people think they have. They can try to imitate things all day, but it won't do anything. So we have to use our power to overthrow them, just like us neglecting our power causes us to be in the condition we're in. But it depends on your family. What kind of family members do you have?
Yeah.
Some of them will show up spiritually all the time. They may not need to be showing up like that.
Yeah.
But the ones who are spiritually cultivated, they'll show up when they need to show up, and then they'll make you do what you need to do because they're not going to, hold your hand through everything.
Yeah, that reminds me of the podcast you did with Kandice. You talked about she had, the people that she was working with, or that's a part of her community, that's a part of her community, write down everything they knew about, their ancestors. Yeah. So it makes a big difference of who you're calling on and for what.
Right.
And in the Christian faith, it doesn't matter if you lived a balanced life or an unbalanced life. The thing is, it's like when you transition and how the services at a church or a funeral home, and they have the picture of the person with their wings. It's like, oh, this person lived such an unbalanced life, but now they're gone to heaven, and now they've got these wings, so they're all good now. But that's not the case. So however you lived or the things that you've done in the physical world, you are held accountable for those things and when you cross over in the spirit world. So then that would be not a spirit that you want to elevate, call on. Right. Okay.
Somebody who murdered 30 people and then turned their life over to Jesus 10 minutes before they died, and they're like, well, he made it to heaven.
Yeah.
So, of course, Jesus don't exist, so they figure that out. When they transition and they get to the other side, then that's when they realize there's no Jesus over here, there's no Muhammad, there's no Allah, there's no Yahweh, there's no Buddha, there's no Brahman. None of them niggas exist. It's just, and they realize they can't dwell with the pristine community of Nanano and Samafo, spiritually cultivated ancestresses and ancestors. So now they're earthbound, just like some people out on the street, transients and so forth, and they are left to the devices of other individuals who may attack them, may torture them, may, just terrorize them and so forth. They're out like that. So, those other individuals, we don't evoke. If somebody transitioned and they weren't necessarily cultivated, but they weren't like a criminal, just a regular everyday person who transitions, nice person. When they transition, they still have to work on their spiritual development as well.
Right, it's not over for them. They have work to do on the other side.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
And they come in every now and then to check on us. Just like sometimes we have a family reunion, people you haven't seen in a while, they come see you, they exchange information, they tell stories about the family. They're seeing how you're doing, see how your kids doing and so forth. And it's an exchange of energy and you benefit from that. But then they go back to their state and they continue their development. And that's how those kind of individuals periodically, they take place in ancestral ritual. We have every 6 weeks in our Akan tradition, and Abusiadai and so forth. But spiritually cultivated ones who are assigned to you specifically to assist you throughout your life, those are the ones we consistently evoke ritually.
Yeah, and the communication is, I found, it's really as easy as picking up a phone, like you would call a person physically. So if I needed some support with mothering, my mother was an excellent mother. She passed when she was really young, she was only 44. But in that time, she was really...
That's the mother, that's her.
This is a painting I created when I was in art school. So she was a really good homemaker, and just finding out more about the deities that govern the 7 days of the week, and looking up her birthday, which is something like, even in her, even though she's like, in the ancestral realm, I'm still finding out things about her that I didn't know, and I'm like, okay, this is fascinating. Like, I would have never, prior to practicing or studying ancestral religion, I would have never looked up the day that she was born. We honor her birth dates, but knowing that
the day of the week.
The day of the week, yes.
Right.
So honoring the day of the week that she was born, and knowing that she was born on a Friday, it makes perfect sense, because she was a hairdresser. She did hair out of the home. She kept the home very beautifully. She worked on healing herself from, lupus. She partook in different herbs and ginger. She created ginger bags. She always had an abundance of friends over for hair, nails, dinner parties, fashion shows. It was like a never a dull moment at our house. And I'm like, learning who the deity that governs Friday, which is Afura
right,
and Heru.
Right, that's Afura, Afia, and Akan is Heru. And Oshun and Yoruba, Irizuli and Vodun.
And it makes perfect sense. Like, she was a hairdresser. Oshun also hair governs, hairstylists and beauticians. And, I just remember always having that mirror. So when she would finish, her friend's hair, she would just, put that mirror in front of them, look at that mirror, give her thanks and praise. So looking at that now, it was super ritualistic. Every single time somebody crossed the threshold, every single time somebody sat in the chair, they're talking to her about her problems. She's then pouring into them. Her hands are on their crown. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? So that's already super, like, intimate, or already, like, so close. You know what I'm saying? So for them to entrust her, with not just their hair, but their head, like, it's super spiritual. So, but just learning more even about her, like, making that connection, I'm like, oh, wow, this is so fascinating. So even doing something like that for your ancestors or your ancestors that crossed over, like looking at the day they were born, and also making sure that you're factoring in what time of the day they were born.
Right.
Yeah, so that makes a huge difference. So so then that also helped me to even consider what other offerings I can make to her, because she's a Friday born. I'm like, okay, so this is great, thinking about some of the things that she loved. And so I would reach out and, call on her if I needed some support with mothering. And most recently, I was thinking about, okay, were there any wealthy, like, as it pertains to money, business, because there are a lot of things I'm trying to get started. So I was like, okay, well, who in my family, like, what woman has had, like, success in business, had wealth, status, money, like, she was able to just, like, continue to grow her money.
Right.
And so I thought about my grandfather's sister, who I've only met once. She had a really beautiful house with a lot of, like, when we went to her house, it was when we were younger, children. There was a lot of just fine china, just china cabinets. I mean, antiques were everywhere. It's like we were kind of like in a museum. And me and my sister, like, we grew up in Southeast DC, so you go from not being able to walk in the grass in the 80s because you had to live off of drug needles to not step on those in the grass. We lived that in the Southeast, to going to this estate-looking home with all these antiques and artifacts. So I'm like, oh, okay, so she came to mine. I'm like, oh, okay, well, my Aunt Lois. And so then I started to ask my father a couple of questions about her. And then I even took it as far as to just, one day I woke up and I was like, okay, I started to, like, make offerings and talk to her. But then I put her name on a Google search.
Okay.
She's been deceased for so long. When we were younger, when me and my sister were younger, she was already, like, she could have been in her, she could have probably been in her 70s maybe.
Oh, okay.
So we met her once, and then we only went to her house once. But because I have a desire, I'm just like, well, and sometimes you don't even need to look any further than your own bloodline.
Yeah.
You will look like, let me see what Oprah's talking about this week, or who's doing this, or who do I need to follow for. Let me check for whatever social site, but you have your own social site within, you know, your own bloodline, your own lineage. So as I put her name in the Google search. I had no idea what I was doing. I put her name in the Google search. Nothing came up. I typed it a different way, like 3 different ways. And in the last way I spelled her name, which I think I put her maiden name, her married name. And a picture of her came up from the Smithsonian Institute. The Smithsonian, it says, here is Mrs. Lois Smith at her residence in Washington, D.C. with a guest at her dinner party. It was a very elaborate, it's a black and white photo, it was very elaborate, beautiful spread with the silverware and the dishes and really stacked up, and then she was sitting down, everybody was kind of gathered around her, they were really dressed up. But that's a photo negative that's sitting somewhere of my family member, of my ancestor, in the Smithsonian Museum in Washington, D.C. Right. So it's just like just being consistent and committed, and when you get those inclinations, acting on them. And if you miss the opportunity, other opportunities are going to come around. But something as simple as, and it's also it's simple and it's also elaborate. Like, who's going to put in a Google search? Google wasn't even around then. It's like, who's going to have her name recorded into something? Right. But because I felt inclined to do it, and then when her name came up, it was just a picture of her in her residence, the house that we visited as children, and her entertaining a couple of different socialites or whatever people of affluence in DC around that time. So that was really interesting.
And that's ancestral communication that reintroduces your children and your sisters and their children to that ancestress. And then she's assisting you, the feedback mechanism, she's assisting you in the things that you're trying to accomplish business-wise and otherwise. So that's a powerful way. And like you said, that's having a social media site in our own blood circle.
Yeah.
Like, we're often, if we want to learn about something that's, powerful and grandiose and so forth, we'll look at ancient kings and queens and empires and so forth. Whether it's ancient Kandice and Kemet, Nubia in Egypt, or empires of West Africa, Afuraitkaitnit, we learn about the kings and queen mothers who established great empires and what's now Ghana and Nigeria and Mali and Songhai and, various places. But very often we don't look within our own blood circles because, again, we think we didn't do anything over here for hundreds of years and everybody else did something.
Yeah.
But right in the matriclan and patriclan blood circles, anything that we need to overcome any obstacle, they overcame every obstacle.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we have that capacity.
And that's the thing. It's like we have people who, and it just makes me think about when people are like, well, Jesus died for my sin,
Right.
And it's like, well, how do you know that? And have you ever even seen an actual real picture of the person that you're saying? But you can name the people who actually died for you to have the rights and be in touch with, and these people are in your families. Like, they were the sacrificial lamb for you to be where you are today. Right. They have a name, first name, last name. You can trace their, your lineage back to, wherever your matriclan and patriclan from. And I was thinking about how, we look elsewhere as it pertains to, the things we're trying to accomplish. In particular, sometimes, non-melanated communities or society to get validated, to receive validation. And it just makes me think about, like, every Black History Month here in the United States, it just feels like and I shared this with you before, like whatever that, even if it's a leap year or whatever, it's like this gray cloud of we shall overcome. Like the energy is super low, and it's just like all these images and movies of, the March on Washington and slavery and shackles. But once those images, and we've been being fed those images since we were younger. Yes, we know what happened, and we're definitely not forgetting about what happened. It happened because we're here today. But once those images are continuously embedded and programmed into your mind, you're not going to see the value in being Black or being African, because you're associating those images with being impoverished and being not having freedom and not knowing who you are. So of course you're going to gravitate naturally going to gravitate to the opposite of that, which is the opposite of black is white, the opposite of, being impoverished. The images that they're showing you is rich, is wealth, is corporate America, is lack of independence. So because those images are consistently being, poured into us, you're not going to see the value of, and our history doesn't start right there.
Right.
It goes way beyond that. You know what I'm saying? So if you're just starting there, you're not going to see the value in who we are as a people versus going back to before, this enslavement happened here.
Right.
And seeing the wealth and the pure brilliance of the things that we created and who we always have been.
Right.
Since the beginning of the time.
No, that's powerful. That's this little segment. This is like a blip in the continuum of our true story. 300 years. We've been here for millions.
Yeah.
And we weren't apes first. We've
Right.
been here for millions of years as, Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit human beings. So this is a time period. We're coming out of that. And the more of us who get back on track, it's already laid out. The blueprint is laid out of how to eradicate our enemies and restore ourselves back to our greatness. So,
absolutely.
But appreciate this. Appreciate you for legitimizing my little podcast.
Thank you for the little podcast. You finna blow up.
I'm just, Oh, and by the way,
oh man,
Mama Kandice, we're not gonna give the name yet, but she has a podcast coming.
Yes.
Don't want to nobody steal the name yet, but once the information is out, of course, we're going to share it all social media, all that information. So we're going to go ahead and end here. Once again, yet I say we thank everyone for supporting our podcast. Use our podcast hashtag HoodooCast. Join our Patreon community. You can join the Patreon community, the HoodooCast Patreon community. And when you do that, you get exclusive content, early drops for episodes, access. We have 38 online courses that we have completed, that we conducted. Many of those courses you have access to for the Patreon members only. Also, and you can, we have the links on the website for our classes and so forth. You can download our 31 books for free and so forth. So check out the Patreon community, HoodooCast. But once again, yet I say we thank everybody for supporting the work. And Yabesha Bio, we will meet again. That's it.
Yerase, we thank you for tuning in to our podcast. See our website at hoodoocast.com to download our 31 books and access our 38 online courses. See our HoodooCast Patreon community for all exclusive content, and also use our HoodooCast hashtag on all social media platforms. Yebeshia.